Well, so let's see if everything works. Famous last words. So, hello, good morning, everyone. It's amazing that so many of you guys are already out of your beds this morning, despite a nice after party yesterday. So yes, I was already announced and presented, and you already know that I'm quite busy already. One of the reasons is because I published this book. I'm traveling quite a lot right now. Whoever follows me on Twitter or Instagram will have seen that. In Germany, in Switzerland, or in Austria. And no matter where I am and which kind of event I'm at, be it a panel, be it a workshop or a talk, at some point, most cases, quite quickly, there will be two questions. The first, do you still get hate comments? The second is, how do you deal with these comments? Well, the first question is not quite I can't answer this question satisfyingly, but it's quite easy to answer. Yes, I still get these hate comments. So in most cases, the question is more, is it more or less? The second question isn't as easy to answer. What's especially difficult for young is that a lot of young women ask this question, and then the answer is even more difficult because these women are actually already excited about the internet, want to do things with the internet, want to publish their work, want to write, want to publish pictures, videos, events. They want to participate in discussions. They simply are full of amazing ideas. At the same time, they're afraid of simply being present online to be subject to hate attacks. And then it's me sitting there or standing. And I would love to tell them about the amazing things about the internet. I want to tell them about the internet that has given me so many incredible friendships that span several continents. I want to tell them about the internet that has given me my voice to a certain extent, that made me start blogging. And that has brought me to events like this one as well. So yeah, shout out to everyone who was here in 2007 already. The internet I want to talk about is the one that has made me aware of politics, that has shown me that I can be part of the change if I want to see it in the world. But instead, I also have to and want to be honest. So instead of these things, we talk about hard reality. And there's going to be questions like, can I circumvent putting my name on my blog? Should I maybe start using a pseudonym from the beginning? So when I do talks offline and use a pseudonym, will I be taken seriously? Is it enough to block, or is it enough to block people, or do I need to make screenshots? How do I react to anonymous threats? How do I react to a shitstorm? And stuff like that, and so on, and so on, and so on. I don't think that we should have these questions. It should be necessary for people to ask themselves these questions before they participate in discussions online. I think it's high time that we do not only admit that our current online culture is broken, but also that it's high time to develop solutions, both short-term and long-term solutions. So, based on also in the spirit of the song that gave the title to this talk, let's talk about freedom of expression, baby. Let's talk about you and me. Let's talk about all the good things and the bad things that may be. I'd like to start with a few definitions that concern the topic of hate speech and violence online, which also makes it sometimes a bit difficult to talk about these things, although language is, of course, very important, especially in this area. So let's start with point 1.1, freedom of expression. It means the right to freedom of expression. It's written down in the basic law in Article 1. Everyone has the right to express their opinion freely in both written pictures and audio. There's no censorship. be it direct or indirect. That sounds easy, but there's a lot of people who still mix this up with their expressions and the things they say existing within some kind of societal vacuum where they shouldn't be criticized when they, for example, are racist or homophobic. So there's an amazing XKCD comic who probably everyone here knows, but I'm still going to show it to you guys. This comic explains quite nicely how this principle of freedom of expression actually works. Just as a quick explanation, I'm using the German translation by the linguist Anatol Stefanovic, who also references the European legal framework. It says, important public announcement. The right to freedom of expression means that the government cannot persecute you for what you say. It doesn't mean that I have to listen to your bullshit or that I need to give you storage for what you're saying. Article 11 of the EU Charter of Basic Human Rights doesn't protect you from criticism or reactions. When you're being boycotted or criticized, when your program is being cancelled or you're excluded from an internet forum, is that not a violation of your freedom of expression? It simply means that the people who are listening to you think that you're an asshole, and they're showing you that you're not welcome.
The next term we have to talk about, of course, in this frame is hate speech. This obviously means speech containing hate and instigation of public hate. The debate in Germany has not come very far, and so I'm borrowing from the discussion in the US. This is not a linguistic but a political term. Short definition: hate speech means forms of expression that intimidate, denigrate, or incite violence against people based on their gender, their religion, sexual orientation, or origin. This is not a phenomenon new to the internet, but we have to talk about this because it has increased due to technical means available now. The Amadeo Antonio Foundation has published a very interesting leaflet on hate speech, and it enumerates the following elements of hate speech. Equation, like Jews are being equaled to Israel or blacks to Africa. Conspiracy theories, such as Israel has
So, for example, opposing us and you, and the position of a pressure to act. For example, if we let them keep dancing on our noses, we will all be gone. And normalization of existing discrimination. Like, well, it's no surprise that the blacks are treated like that. Racism, anti-Semitism, sexism, and other forms of discrimination also exist online, still exist online. After all, existing power structures will not simply be solved when the internet, when they become ones and zeros. That's something that people hoped for in the beginning, but that's something that didn't happen. Actually, online, we have a climate where the threshold for using violence or hate speech is being lowered. So suddenly, hate speech against these people who are members of these minorities is even more socially acceptable. So we also have further lack of acceptance. So hate speech means dehumanization of the people who are affected by this. Another term that appears in the debate as well, and that you probably all know, is our old friend the shitstorm, which is also defined in the German Duden right now, defined as a storm of a storm of indignation that can also include hateful comments. So now this word is included in the Duden, but at the same time it also leads to this word being used in an inflational sense. So for example, just if you have 3 critical articles, people might call this a shitstorm. At the same time, there also are straight hate campaigns that are being called shitstorms. Even if these hate campaigns are actually organized, it's actually marginalizing or underestimating these campaigns. So criticizing someone for actual content is obviously something completely different than telling an activist that she just needs to be fucked well again and that somebody will be waiting with a knife for her some other time. So the level we're talking is a completely different one. So for example, if you're a member of a company account and people don't even need to stand up personally and can also change places and can take turns in dealing with the crisis. That's the difference when you have a company versus a private person. In those cases, social media are being used to criticize people. So defamation and insults can also happen within a shitstorm, but when, for example, hate comments or emails are what becomes the baseline for online discourse, this is turning into a completely different situation where we really have to talk about hate campaigns. Another term that is, again, really important and difficult is that of trolling. So why this is difficult, maybe a small list of what we consider to be trolls nowadays. Defamation, stalking, falsification of accounts, and spreading of false information, the spreading of naked pictures, doxing. So when, for example, private data, like the address of a person, is being published online, when the specific companies where people work are being contacted to, in order to talk badly about people there, threats of violence, not only to people themselves, but also to other people close to them, and also threats of murder. And of course, also in the beginning, it also was meant a deliberate disruption of discourse online.
The implication of I'm just making fun here may mean that it's not being taken seriously. Trolling also doesn't differentiate between the instigators of such campaigns or those who jump on the bandwagon and enable the campaign to really get started. If you want to learn more, you should read up on the hater typology by Yasmina Banashchuk, which has more detail on this. Then there is a problem with the online culture suggesting that we should not feed the trolls. This mantra has established itself quite well, telling people that they just shouldn't pay attention to hateful comments to make trolls lose interest in their campaigns. This, unfortunately, leads to a toxic comment culture, because if you're under attack, you're being blamed as the victim, because as soon as you start complaining, the fault is yours for making it worse. This makes solidarity with the people affected very hard instead of being a no-brainer. This also shows the extent of hate comments, especially marginalized people who could make use of the platforms on the net and start a start a new arena online and are being pushed out of the discussion again. So it's not just about criticism, as it is often claimed. Hate speech works to intimidate people, isolate them, and silence them. And even if there are no physical consequences, in the end, the results are quite painful to those people who are affected. Consequences can be self-censorship, sleeplessness, emotional pressure. And these are just a few of the results showing that psychological stress always comes along with physical symptoms. People are also made into canvases for projection by hate speech. And this is shown very nicely by this selfie by Zoe Quinn, a game developer and the first victim of Gamergate. She has been harassed since August 2014 on a daily basis. And the text on this picture, the light inside is broken, but I still work. In this context, statements or attitudes like, oh, these are just some crazy people on the internet, grow thicker skin, or you don't need to be on the internet in the first place, must be called at least cynical. And aside from that, thank you for the suggestion. My skin is thick enough already, but I wouldn't know how the fact that I have to expect rape threats on a daily basis should be considered an acceptable internet behavior. The insults, harassment, and threats are real, not virtual. The fear coming with this is just as real. On the example of pop culture critic Anita Sarkeesian, it can be shown very nicely how hard she has to fight to still be considered as a human being, not only to those people who attack her on a daily basis, but also to those who support her. She's being lionized as an indestructible hero day to day, and loses her humanity in this way as well. This is a very important point I would like to underscore. Once again, if you want to support someone, don't do it in this way. The fact is, if you don't just want to be a consumer on the net, but also a participant, especially in the political arena, you need to become visible, and this makes you susceptible to attacks. A study by the Pew Research Center for Internet Science and Tech from last year confirms the obvious. Especially young women are subject to harassment on the internet, mostly through stalking, 26%, and sexual harassment, 25%. But hate speech, as I already said, is not a new problem. But with the advancements in platforms like Facebook, Twitter, or other platforms, those are being used for hate campaigns in a targeted way. In addition, there is the problem of those platforms, especially the largest ones, have mostly been built by white men, a societal group which is affected least by societal discrimination. And therefore, those platforms did not account for structural harassment. The diversity reports on Twitter and Facebook, well, are according to this. But when platforms insist on freedom of expression and do not enforce rigid moderation of users who engage in harassment and rape threats, they have already taken aside that of the harassers. There are calls for industry standards for these platforms, and I think this would be a good way to tackle this issue. But resistance and protection as a single person are a luxury if you look at the time and the mental capacities required to have them, and the technical skills required to use them. But the responsibility for dealing with online harassment should not lie with the people who receive them, and the time and resources consumed by resisting these are taken into account by harassers, of course. And then, such hate campaigns as in Gamergate account for a lot of traffic and clicks, which is a good thing for the platforms. This shows a basic problem that the optimization of profitability is assigned a higher priority than users' well-being.
So when it comes to the legal framework, we do have an article on hate speech and on incitation of public hate, but hate speech in itself is often manifested in statements that are seemingly rational and that are then supposedly outside the outside the legal framework, but that are then, for example, supporting right-wing propaganda that is using wrong facts. So, first question: who on here would know right away what to do when they receive a murder threat on Twitter? Okay, thanks. Who would feel safe taking this threat of murder to the next police station and would assume that the people there will know what Twitter is? Exactly. That's exactly the problem, at which you can see that the digital divide is something that already also exists in the criminal justice system, an area where normally email is still being printed. On top of that, when we talk about laws and talking about the possibility of using the law, and hate and defamation online are being documented. They're not simply being spoken, but they're also influencing the digital footprint that people are leaving online. So this is also something that might influence, for example, if someone applies for a job and this person is being Googled and this then hate speech blog post turns up. So this is something that might influence their future as well. The problem when it comes to the legal framework is that as an individual, especially if you have one of these constant attacks, it's almost impossible to master this on your own. So how should you check all of these things and then report all of them? This is a reality that has not arrived in the laws as we have them nowadays. So in that sense, we simply need an update for our legal framework. On top of that, introducing the crime of cybermobbing, as some jurists have already demanded, is something that would also be helpful. Until we have something that we will probably still have a few more status updates and a few more hate comments, and we should also realize that laws will not be able to solve everything, especially if the system works so slowly, especially compared to how fast the internet works. On top of that, of course, we have to know and understand of what communication via screens does to us, that our brains are connected, work in a sense that these messages that we receive online are actually bringing us into a defense mode, especially because we lack gesture and mimics. On top of that, there's of course also the problem of lack of possibility to persecute these things based on the legal system. So especially when you talk about people who are simply jumping on the bandwagon in hate campaigns, this is especially relevant. Hate speech is a problem in our debate culture, and this is a problem that we have to address. And this competence can only function with courage against hate speech. And this question of media competence, it's also where I see that we need competence in terms of media and journalists who also need to apply this to their own comment sections and who need to moderate the aggressive climate there accordingly for people to be able to participate to begin with, so that people don't get the impression that this is what the mass of the people actually thinks. So online debates are forming opinions as well. So if we have this hateful attitude that's dominating there, this is also something that will be influencing the rest of the discussion if, for example, the first comment is an especially hateful one. Furthermore, when it comes to media, I see a responsibility to not use victimhood as clickbait to get a lot of clicks and views. It's not enough to have these articles to say, oh, it's bad what happened to this particular person. Victims are also always experts of their own situation and need to be listened to in such a capacity. On top of, well, apart from that, well, writing for shitstorms is not journalism. But the positive side, also based on these problems, new networks and initiatives are being formed, like the online abuse prevention, like HeartMob, which is currently still being supported. So if you have some money left, you can visit their Kickstarter. So these initiatives usually are initiatives by people who have been affected by hate speech, who realize that there's no way to endure this, that they need to take care of this themselves, and that the platforms they want to use and they love to use are not doing what they're supposed to do. So when it comes to these initiatives, we also need to realize that in most cases, these are people that are dealing with these things on a volunteer basis or a very small budget, and are actually pioneers in this field that they're working in. So especially considering that, we should support this as much as we can. So to sum up, I see an interaction of several levels that we have: platforms, the legal framework, the media competence, and also a cultural change. What I mean with cultural change when I talk about hate speech is that I mean when we talk about actual criticism, which is not hate speech, we need a value system that is up to date and is able to deal with the internet, the way the internet works, and also focuses on a respectful treatment of each other, a value system that's based on empathy and also lets people make mistakes and let us grow based on these mistakes. We need ideas on how to deal with excuses and how you can excuse yourself and how excuses can work in the digital age. Internet is an area where people live, is a development that is increasing and not decreasing. It's becoming stronger and stronger. So simply the internet becoming mobile, that's not anything about digital natives, but it's about the internet being more and more important in our lives. So currently the partition of online and offline right now should people, instead of partitioning online and offline world, people should start realizing that the online and offline world are more and more intertwined. So based on this, it's also especially important that events like this do not only introduce a code of conduct, but also enforce it and use it to strengthen the community. This is also something that signals to people that online and offline are intertwined. Hate comments are still defended as freedom of speech way too often, and people are not looking at the victims whose freedom of speech is being limited by these comments, and by these comments simply being accepted online, and how this in turn affects life offline. Addressing these problems is internet politics, and as such belongs onto the agenda that also has the surveillance scandal on it. So when we talk about the freedom of speech and the right not to be watched, not to be surveilled, we also need to look at who is able to actually express their opinion online without a problem online, and who is maybe being scared off. Internet is where we work. It's where we can find people, where we meet all these friends. It's where we fall in love, where we say goodbye, and also where we welcome new people from all over the world. So where we can give a platform to our ideas, where we can look at cat pictures and still stay in touch with our families, and we can look at cat pictures without having an allergic reaction. It's a place where we can create amazing things like this, not bound by time and place. The things we do online will always have consequences for us as people in front of the screens, and in turn, conditions outside of the internet can also bring us there. So, what is an internet worth that assumes that hate comments are not only to be expected but need to be endured? When people say, "Well, just go somewhere else if you don't like this," that's not an alternative anymore, and it has never been one. I personally want an internet that gives me the answer to how I deal with hate comments directly, but it doesn't exist. So we need this internet for everyone. Thank you, everyone.
Anne Wizorek, vielen Dank. Sie können einfach sitzen bleiben. In 2 Minuten geht's hier auf Stage 1 weiter.
Thanks, everyone. You can simply